Welcome to Retroality TV presents Reimagine That with Chris Mann, offering refreshing reality with a retro twist. This week we have part 1 of Chris's exclusive interview with Genoa City's very own Tracy Abbott Connolly, actress Beth Maitland. And we'll find out what messages we have stored in our subconscious minds in our Reawakening segment with everyone's favorite dream interpreter, Yvonne Riva. And now, introducing your host, Chris Mann.
Thank you, Linda Kay, our vintage-voiced announcer and producer. And hi again, everyone. Welcome to episode 21 of Reimagine That, the Retroality.tv podcast where retro pop meets forward thought. This is your host, Chris Mann, and it is August 22nd, 2013. We are so excited to share the first of our two-part exclusive interview with soap legend, actress Beth Maitland. You know her as Tracy Abbott Connolly on the CBS iconic daytime drama, The Young and the Restless, which is currently celebrating its 40th year. Beth has been with the show for over 30 years. She has some incredible stories that she's sharing with us here. More on her in a bit, but let me just say she takes us through the changing realities of soap operas since their heydays in the 1980s and 1990s. You won't want to miss this two-part interview with this uber-talented and cool lady who also talks about how she's reimagined her life in recent years, including most recently as an author and creative living expert via her online identity, the somewhat ironically named Drama Queen Bee, which Beth talks about here in part 1. All of this, in one way or another, sort of brings us to our theme for this episode, which is rethinking the drama. We often do that in our own lives, don't we? And we see it happen all the time in soaps. People have to rethink their own dramas on camera and off. And the TV networks have been rethinking daytime drama for the last 10 plus years. In the last few years especially, the daytime drama, the traditional classic soap, has sadly been replaced by the drama of talk shows and other cheaper daytime fare. We've seen the end of shows that have been on for decades and decades as the world turns, The Guiding Light. A couple years ago, ABC canceled prematurely All My Children and One Life to Live, shows that had been on for about 4 decades or more in the case of All My Children, which I grew up watching along with Young and the Restless. Even Oprah Winfrey has had to rethink the drama. She has struggled in her first couple of years with her own network and recently has finally started to turn a profit, in part because she has expanded her programming to include soap operas, or as I like to call them, the Sopra. Fans wanted her to save the soaps a couple years ago. And lo and behold, this summer she's giving a 6-week trial run to All My Children and One Life to Live, which are now half-hour shows produced by the online network Prospect Park Productions for Hulu. And now, so far, they've been doing pretty well for the own network. It looks like maybe they're going to become permanent fixtures in Oprah's daytime lineup. So far the ratings have been good. They've been getting better. So maybe Oprah will save the Sopra after all. People want to see their scripted drama. We have enough of this fake scripted drama reality shows, which really are scripted. We want to escape into the sudsy dramas of daytime. And so thank you, Oprah, for bringing those back. Here's hoping that she can get Susan Lucci to sign up for All My Children. Susan, as many of you know, has had a primetime hit with the very soapy Devious Maids on Lifetime Television. That's a Mark Cherry production. But you know what? Susan is Erica Kane, so I think we can expect to see Susan back pretty soon. One quick All My Children anecdote, and then we'll dive right into The Young and the Restless. A lot of people know me as the Three's Company guy. I wrote behind-the-scenes book, Come and Knock on Our Door, which we are looking, by the way, at a new edition of the book, probably in 2014. I'm a sitcom guy, but I've also got that drama side to me, don't we all, really? And I was reminded of just how much both of those genres formed me growing up. The comedy and the drama, the yin and the yang. I was going through storage a few years ago, and I found my second grade pencil box, my school supply box. And I was like, oh my God, I totally remember that from Mrs. Hauser's class. And I opened it up, and on the inside of the box, written in crayon, were two sayings. One, beans don't burn in the kitchen, which was my mixed up lyric from the Jeffersons. It's actually beans don't burn on the grill, fish don't fry in the kitchen. But hey, I was in second grade. That made me laugh so hard I was in tears. Which was appropriate because the second thing I had written, I think in purple crayon, was I hate Ray Gardner. And for fans of All My Children, everyone who grew up in the 70s and 80s knows that Ray Gardner was the original villain on All My Children. Jenny Gardner's dad, Tad Martin's dad. He was a really bad guy. He raped Ruth Martin, who was just the saint on the show. And he shot Chuck Tyler, who was the hero of the show in the 70s and 80s. And when I saw I Hate Ray Gardner next to Beans Don't Burn in the Kitchen, oh my God, I was just in tears laughing. And I remembered one of my first memories of watching soaps. It must have been summer of 79. I was home, from school. It must have been the summer. And Ray Gardner shot Chuck Tyler. And I remember Ruth Martin's husband, the revered Dr. Joe, was telling people that Chuck was shot just beneath the spleen. The bullet hit just below the spleen, and that's why he survived. And that stuck with me. And that is why I hated Ray Gardner. He almost killed Chuck. Look what he did to Ruth Martin. That man wreaked havoc. What he did to Jenny and Tad, and oh my God. So, very funny to see that. And likewise, I have memories in the late 70s and early 80s of Y&R. Recently, we had Y&R's original heroine on the show, Jamie Lynn Bower, who played Lori Brooks. She gave us a very revealing interview about her time on the show and the years since. I totally recall her in one of her big storylines where she was on trial for murdering her boyfriend's mother, Vanessa, this crazy woman, another villain. And I also have such memories of the late Jeannie Cooper, who played the irrepressible, irreplaceable Catherine Chancellor. People who are watching the show still 40 years on CBS, people who have been watching in the media know that we lost Jeannie in May, a very quick illness and passing. And just recently on the show, just in the last few days, they have announced the death of Catherine. And boy, is that going to shake up that show. I totally recall her drama, her drinking, her rivalry with Jill, played originally by actress Brenda Dixon and now played by Jess Walton, who, like Beth Maitland, Emmy-winning, Jeannie Cooper, Emmy-winning. We've got an incredible group of people there, and thankfully the producers of Y&R seem to realize the vital importance of these legacy characters, and I am keeping my fingers crossed that the death of Catherine Chancellor ripples through the lives of these legacy characters, including Beth's Tracy, over the next several months. I would love to see a true 40th anniversary of Y&R. Let's bring back Jamie Lynn. Let's bring back those characters from the 70s and see how all of these people intertwine with the young. We got to have the restless in there too, okay? But young, old, restless, not so restless, comedy drama, Y&R has had it all, and no more embodied in one individual than in Jeannie Cooper's Catherine Chancellor. all of the funny moments that character had, particularly with the character of Jill, Jess, and before that, Brenda Dixon. And we also saw it with Tracy, when Tracy kicked Lauren's butt a couple times. And Beth will take us down memory lane in part 1 and 2, talking about these bonds that she has with these actors and with these legacy characters. Also, in the August 26th issue of CBS Soaps In Depth, you might still be able to find it at the grocery store. There is a great, 6-page feature looking back with Beth Maitland, celebrating 3 decades of Tracy Abbott. Beth recently came back into the fold in Genoa City indefinitely. So let's keep our fingers crossed that means a long, long time. Beth was the first actress on YNR to win an Emmy back in the 80s. She always just knocks it out of the park when they bring her in for emotional scenes. Her relatability and her accessibility have always been apparent on that show. She is the grounding force. She is us. She is the everyday person thrown into this soapy, extraordinary world on YNR. And this aspect of her is very, very apparent in this interview. She's candid, refreshingly candid, talking about the heyday of soaps and how things have changed in recent years with these soaps getting canceled, budget cutbacks, how the egos in daytime, which can be pretty giant, have had to adjust given these realities. She's seen a lot. She's been there off and on in the last several years, in particular as a recurring character. She's seen the changes during these, trying times for the daytime soap. She's a survivor just like YNR, and I think you're going to love her interview. Without too much further ado, I do want to say, check back with us. By the end of August, we'll have part 2 of her interview up, where she discloses some things about Catherine Chancellor's funeral, which is set to air, I believe, September 3rd and 4th on YNR. She also shares some special memories of Jeannie Cooper, and she talks publicly in a very candid way, I think for the first time ever, about her former co-star Brenda Dixon. Certainly for the first time about Brenda's new memoir, her quote-unquote tell-all book, My True Hidden Hollywood Story, which Brenda has been rolling out in the last several weeks from eBook and now most recently in print. Brenda has been doing interviews. The book has some very controversial aspects to it, some very unflattering portrayals of YNR creator, the late William Bell, who passed a few years ago, as well as the late Jeannie Cooper. So you won't want to miss part 2 of Beth's refreshingly candid interview. And you certainly don't want to miss part 1 of this interview, which we now roll into. So let's rewind to 1982, when a very interesting, unique character entered the scene at Genoa City, Tracy Abbott. And let's also flash forward with the woman who has portrayed her off and on for over 3 decades, given her heart and soul. And let's find out if her portrayer would like to come back on contract regularly. She's been recurring off and on for the last several years. Would she come back for good? She should come back for good. Viewers would love that. What does Beth do when she's not on the show? How does she fulfill herself creatively? Why did she get into acting? Where does she see Tracy going next? We tackle all of these questions. So sit back and enjoy our chat with Beth Maitland. Hi there, Beth. How are you?
Hi, Chris. I'm glad to be here today. Thank you for having me on your show.
Well, thank you so much for joining us here at Reimagine That. We are thrilled to see you back on YNR of late. And I must say, I echo Marie Osmond's enthusiasm during your fun recent appearance on her talk show. When I say indefinitely, you're back?
Well, it looks that way. What has happened is that although I am not under contract, the writers have brought Tracy back into the Genoa City canvas, and I usually am back for 3 or 4 or 5, 6 episodes, and then I fly back to New York. But the character's having marital problems, and they are basically separated, and she, in the story, Tracy lives with Abby, her niece now, and so they can use me whenever they have something for that character to do to support Jack or Abby or whomever. I'm local now.
Perfect.
Yes, that leaves me available for all kinds of different interactions. And frankly, in this recent return, I've worked with actors that are a complete surprise.
Yeah.
I had scenes with Nikki.
Yes.
And it was actors that I don't usually work with, and maybe just a handful of times over the 30-plus years I've been on the show. So that's been really fun to open sort of alleyways that they may expand on at some future time.
Yes, and it's encouraging for the audience, too, to see Tracy weaved back into that 3 decades plus of fabric of the show. And I want to talk to you about fabric here in a little bit, about your quilting adventures.
Smooth segue, Chris.
Smooth segue. You've got a lot of other things going on, but I first want to, talk some here about Tracy Abbott Connolly is still part of her hyphenate for now, her married name. You're on Twitter and Facebook and YouTube now as Drama Queen Bee. More about that in a minute. What do you make of the audience's continued warm reception to you and Tracy?
Well, I'll tell you. First of all, I, like you, love technology.
Yeah.
And even though I'm a 50-plus-year-old woman now, because there are so many creative avenues to explore with technology, I embrace it. And Twitter was sort of my last holdout. But in my first few days of my recent return, early part of the summer, I had lunch with Tracy Brugman, who plays Lauren.
Yes.
We're very dear friends. She started 6 months after I did, these 30-plus years ago.
Oh.
And we are very, very good friends. And so we went to lunch, and she said, you have to do Twitter. And I said, well, I do have a Facebook page, and I have my website, and I have these other ways that I can reach out to fans and have a more instant communication with them and make announcements when I need to. But I said, look, convince me why Twitter is a useful tool, because it seems like it would just take up the whole rest of my day.
Right.
She said the good news is that you can be on it as much or as little as you need to be, but it is an amazing instant gratification kind of outreach, and that's what I have found it to be. And I just last night reached my 5,000th follower.
So that's great.
And I've only been on it for a couple of months, and I don't know how to grow it. I'm not an expert. I don't have someone else managing my social media. It's always me. It's just me. And in the 80s, when I first started on the show, it was just me and my fan mail, too. I answered every letter, and until that got completely overwhelming. But I still picked up and read every letter and answered the ones that I could get to. And so I have as personal communication with people that are willing to reach out to me as possible on my Facebook page, on my Twitter. And it has been enormously flattering and enormously gratifying that even though over the years, especially the most recent one, I'm not there on the canvas very often, people seem to really continue to really love the character of Tracy and really honor that by their kindness and their outreach to me. They're flattering, they're sweet. I do take a great deal of pride in the work part of being an actor, and I've taught acting over the years. I've been a vice president at an acting school over the years, and I have a great commitment to the actual work of it. Some celebrities don't choose to take that part of it very seriously. I really do. And so it couldn't be more gratifying, and I can't appreciate it more when people tell me, your scenes reached me, you made me cry today. Honestly, Chris, the reason I became an actor, I had, like many people, had sort of a troubled teenage years, and I did my first play when I was 13. But I would sit in a dark theater, and it's the only place, if I was really moved by what I was seeing on the screen, it's really the only safe place left for us to sort of feel free to emote.
Wow.
In a theater, you can laugh out loud and nobody's judging you.
That's
you
right.
You can cry over a sad scene and dab your eyes and nobody's judging you because you're there to be a part of what entertainment is meant for. It's to sweep you away for a time, for a limited time, away for escapism, away from your problems, away from your life. And it just hooked me. That power was so addicting to find out that I had what it took. If I nurtured it and trained it and used it, I had what it took to make others feel as well. And so this social media has been such an amazing sort of ego massage.
We all need that sometime.
And I find out Peter Bergman, who plays Jack, cautions me, you can't take this all too seriously, because then your ego gets out of control.
Yeah.
And I don't know that there's much jeopardy of that, but I do feel so blessed when people say, "Oh my gosh, your scenes today with Jack at the restaurant, we were crying about Colleen and her loss.
Yes.
Oh my gosh, it threw me back into that storyline. It made me, tear up." And I just, that is the biggest gift that I can describe to you.
Oh, wow.
From my fans to me and to Tracy. The biggest compliment is I do get an instant little shot of a little boost of appreciation, and I really appreciate it so much.
That is so lovely. And like Marie Osmond said to you, you've always been sort of like the real character, the sort of the grounding force there on YNR. And your realness comes through, and that's been part of the connection that you've had with the audience for 30 plus years. I mean, when you described what it's like for you in the theater as a teenager, I felt that way sitting in front of the TV as a teenager, because I got to connect from the audience's angle, whether it was YNR, which my mom and grandma loved, and I kind of got hooked during those Tracy, Lauren, Danny days. Yay, exactly. And or whether it was Three's Company or a sitcom, whatever it was, dramatic or comedy, as an audience member, I got to relish in that, and there's that connection. So you bring that realness to the screen as Tracy. You've been behind the scenes for a few years.
Yes.
When you come back home to Genoa City, and you've been recurring on and off since 2001, it's like you never left. You've done and are doing so many new creative things, which I want to talk to you about here in a bit. You're raising your teenage daughter away from LA. And so, but then when you come back into Sony, into CBS, and you step back into Tracy, and you're in the spotlight in that sort of celebrated, fun way, what does that mean to you? Because there seems to be a duality there. Beth at the ranch and Tracy at the studio. What's that like to you to step back into that wowness?
I have to say that that's a really good question.
Yeah.
I'm tickled you asked it. The reason I can do the things that you've mentioned, the reason that I can have the freedom to be outside of town and, have my family out this direction and my animals out in the Central Coast and make the 2.5 hour, 3 hour drive into town when I need to come back, or when I work on my production job, or when I'm back as Tracy, it all is really have been informed by my time at the Young and the Restless. I would not have financially been in it, although I haven't been there enough to be rich from it. It put me in a situation where early in my life I could sort of build my way up to some financial flexibility. And so all of this is a gift from the Young and the Restless, and I really want to honor that. It is really important to me. I see people leaving the show and wanting to go out in other areas, and that's all really good and a very personal decision, and I'm not judging or making comment to that. I can only speak from my own experience watching the way daytime has changed, the number of shows that have been canceled, the number of very few shows that remain.
Yes.
I hope that they don't dishonor daytime and eliminate it entirely.
Oh, yeah.
But the writing is on the wall that we're not finished with the change. And I feel like after all the Young and the Restless has done for me, I feel it's really important for me to be willing to wait it out with them.
Yes.
And I love it when I see other contract players that have been there all the time that also honor their work and honor the benefits that they have taken for themselves and their family, raising their kids, sending them to the best colleges, putting them in the best schools, living in lovely homes. We've all advantaged from, the practical side of it has been a really great gift from that show. And so I'm not saying it's about the money, because we just talked about how much it means for it to be about the work. But I am saying there's a certain honor, we are not taken advantage of. Things have had to change. People complain about, well, it's not what it used to be and whatever. And that's fair. But the fact is, how it has informed my life, the person I am, the confidence that I now have, an adult in my middle age, the way that I am able to transcend all my hats and all my different areas of productivity, my life at Young and Restless has informed all that.
Wow.
It's made me who I am. It's blessed my family, and I'm so grateful. And so I hop in the car and off I go with my Prius.
Down the coast.
That's right. And I step out of my parking place, and I'm not a different person walking through those doors. I'm a grateful person.
Oh, that's great. And that evolution that you've had with the show, you mentioned your confidence at age 50 plus. That's also reflected in Tracy, and we saw a great scene recently between you and Tracy Bergman. One of those moments that fans just relish for years, and then when they give it to us, we're like, thank you, where's this going? where you two talked about how Lauren used to bully Tracy, and you referred to Tracy as, I used to be a poor, insecure girl who turned to diet pills, but I'm a confident gal now. In terms of that rich history that you have with Tracy and with Lauren, and I've heard rumblings that maybe Michael Damian is returning, at least for a short time, although I don't think he's confirmed that yet. TV Guide called you a couple years ago the Earth Mama, the moral compass, the very soul of Genoa City. But then you do have that young, insecure girl that still has that beneath her. Do you think that there are those layers to peel back on Tracy and to maybe explore where Tracy, Danny, Lauren would be decades later, that kind of storyline?
I would love it. I would love it very much. And I have to say that, this is my public face. Although I'm being candid with you, everybody has those layers.
Yeah.
It may not be that I don't have moments when I have to do something challenging that I'm uncomfortable with, that all those things don't come flooding back, just like in the scene that I tell Lauren. Every now and then, weird circumstances may come up where it's just all those things flood back, and you have to find a place where you can manage that without falling apart. I think there's lots to look at with those things. I think that's one of the reasons, and Marie and I were talking about this, and I was going to interrupt you, but the conversation went a different way, but we're back.
Sure.
Marie mentioned this too. The thing about Tracy, I was very much not a soap character, a typical soap actress or a typical soap character when I was brought in. There were very few, this ground had not been covered yet. I'm not saying that I was the pioneer, but this ground had not really been covered, where there would be a very everyday girl next door character, an overweight, insecure, shy, sort of kind of train wreck character that was very much more real than even Ashley or Jack, who were confident, beautiful, people in control. It was a very odd character. And even if it wasn't weight for others, if it was, everybody had those teen, early developmental years.
Yes.
When we were just finding our feet, when we were just learning to be adults.
Yes.
Everybody had those insecurities. Maybe it wasn't weight. Maybe it was you couldn't manage your curly hair, or you had your nose was too big, or your ears stuck out. I mean, there's a million things that could be that made people relate to Tracy. It didn't have to be her obvious external issue, but any issue made them see that this underdog and root for the underdog to get a hold of things and to succeed and to win and to get Brad and to sing at the concert, and all those little victories Tracy experienced. People cheered because it wasn't necessarily exactly the reason Tracy won was important. It was that it was a victory for everyone that isn't perfect.
Yeah, it was a vicarious thrill for the audience, really.
Yes, and so there's a lot that even as a confident adult, it's just experience and it's just time going by. And in Tracy's case, raising and losing a child, having marriages and careers that are successful for a while and then aren't. There's all these things that life throws us that continue in Tracy to be the epitome of the realness of life. Not some far-fetched, wild storyline, but a storyline pretty true to how our lives as people really go.
Yes.
So I think there's a lot there. I hope that they find a way to tap it. I think it would be wonderful, these years later, as the circle closes. As we look back over the young people and what they experienced, the young Danny, the young Lauren, the young Tracy, and the people that they are now, and how they relate to each other. Where did those relationships end up?
Yes.
I think it would be lots of fun to see.
It would be so much fun. And, Tracy lost Colleen. They've touched on that recently, that heartbreak. Lauren is now going through a bit of karma, her son getting bullied.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting. I love when they go back through the generations, through the decades, and they draw on that history. There's so much great texture there to explore. Even in the 90s, I remember the scene where you kicked Lauren's butt in the hospital waiting room when you guys were both going for Brad, I guess, or she was trying to get Brad away from you.
Yeah.
You had so much material from 1982 when you started till the mid-90s or so. Why did you leave, and would you come back on contract?
Well, there was only one time, and it was in the mid to late 80s, that I left for a short time at my choice.
Okay.
And it was because I had something else that I wanted to pursue briefly, and I did so, and then the show asked me back, and I went back.
Right.
Every time beyond that, Tracy Bregman and I always tease each other about who's been fired the most from Young Adult. And we haven't, it's not really firing, it's just we're done with you for now, or whatever, we're taking you off contract, your storyline's over. It's been things like that. But every other time that I've gone, very honestly, it's not been my choice. I would like to have been there the whole time, and I would like to be there now. And I don't mean this in a really kind of greedy way, but honestly, it is all the things I told you about honoring the show. I miss acting all the time when I'm away, and I am never happier than when I'm there being an actor, being productive, being accepted at my avocation, the thing that I love to do. And I love the work, and I love the challenges, even when they're uncomfortable to play and they're funny and not something that even Tracy would do. There's a certain everyday challenge as an actor that the very minute you read your scenes, you're tempted to say, oh, I would never do that. That's when your challenge begins. That's the day that, as an actor and as a student of acting, you throw your shoulder into it and you find a way to make it work. You find something. It is a personal goal of mine to do something surprising with every scene I'm given. I try to find something in every scene because, there's a certain temptation also to be kind of complacent and lazy over 30 years of playing the same character.
Right.
People often ask me, how can you even do that? How can that even be fresh or interesting at all to you after, 30 years, even though it was on and off? How can you play the same character? That's when your work begins. That's where you look for something in that scene to maybe take it a surprising way that even the writers who imagine in their minds you saying it never thought of.
Yes.
And that's part of the fun of staying committed to the acting part of it, the challenge of finding something to keep it fresh. And recently, Michelle Stafford and I did a scene together, and there was something really, Tracy said something kind of snarky to her, and Michelle, as a person, said, oh my gosh, Tracy would never say that. And I said, Michelle, you don't have to play it that way. And she looked at me, and she was kind of surprised by the comment, but that's what my everyday work is all about for me personally. It gives me so much joy to find something you can play against things, you can play the words, you have to say the words. The writers put them down, you have to say the words, but they don't have to be said in the obvious way. I mean, that's what's really fun about a long-term role. And to answer your question, I would love to be back there more. I would love to explore other things that these new batch of writers who I've only been working with very recently, we have another new regime for this last year. Maybe they have other places they want to take Tracy that we've never thought of.
That would be great.
I'm up for the challenge.
Because Tracy, she's sweet and nice, but she's got some grit. She's got some still there. And I think, we could see some sides to Tracy that maybe we haven't seen for a while, or maybe we haven't seen certain sides yet much at all. But she's definitely a complex character that, if pushed, and you can hit it out of the park. I'm always reading this online when you come back, when Colleen was on her way out, and when Jerry Douglas was dying as John. And I mean, you can come in there and boom, hit it out of the park with emotion and intensity. What are your secrets in terms of doing a super sad emotional scene? I mean, because boy, you just make it happen.
That's another interesting question.
Yeah.
It's not simple. There's not a simple answer. There are various different schools of acting, like the method, that make you relive your evil, horrible, dramatic, terrifying experiences in order for you to internalize those feelings and feel them really. You feel them for real. I can't do that. The acting school I spent the most time at in my early life was, they joked and said, soaps are like the instant rice school of acting. Because, and it's even gotten more so as we have less time to do more take. I mean, we do things in one take almost every day. There's not a whole day to devote even to one episode. We're doing an episode and a half a day almost all the time. And so there's no time to sort of work through it as an actor and say, hey, can I have another take just for me? The answer is no. They can't wait for it. Yeah. So you have to be able to draw on that stuff really, really quickly. There are other actors on my show that are brilliant at it. Melody Thomas is another amazing crier.
Yeah, she is.
Sharon Case is also quick, good crier.
Yes.
But it has to do, in my opinion, with keeping your emotions close to the surface. That does not make me, I mean, if I was a bank teller, I wouldn't cry about everything.
Right.
But, and if I was a checker at the market or a secretary, I would never have allowed myself, because our culture, that people can't just break down in the elevator every time. You have to kind of keep yourself under control. But as an actor, because I kind of have an excuse, I cry about everything. I cry when somebody stops and helps a dog that's loose running down the road. I usually am the one doing it. I'm usually pulling over, putting on my flashers and stopping traffic to save some little dog or something that's lost. But I cry at the opening of an envelope. But it's because, and I kind of use my acting as the excuse, I need to keep those emotions right under the surface, so when I access them, they're available and ready to me.
Great.
When you stuff it down, and in a lot of our daily lives, we have to stuff it down and not be so, be more stoic to be able to be a mature, functioning human. We kind of lose the access to those emotions, and it takes something big, a tragedy or something very moving, to get that to happen. So I just keep mine bubbling under the surface. I try to keep it, realistic and logical and rational. I try not to upset those around me. But that's sort of my secret, is just keeping everything pretty close to the surface, so when I need it, it's there. I don't relive the most horrible things of my life, but I do feel my life deeply.
Yes.
So when I'm doing those Colleen scenes, I don't think about my own beautiful daughter dying. I think about how much I love her. I think about how important my beautiful daughter is to me, and how what a treasure she is. And then those emotions come through the similar feelings. But I don't put myself through, this has saved me thousands and thousands of dollars in therapy. Just to be able to do all this on TV. Kind of work it all out.
Yeah, I bet it would. It's cathartic. In that 2011 interview I mentioned earlier that you did with Michael Logan at TV Guide, you were so candid about how things changed for you in terms of your recurring status following the death of Colleen, the material you were given probably around 2009. And you said, and I'm quoting here, before that, when I'd show up for the occasional wedding, I was kind of treated like a second-class citizen. Now I no longer have to hide in my dressing room because people won't talk to me, or because the new young actors don't know who I am, or because someone thinks they should have had the makeup chair first. I don't have those problems anymore. I feel like an honored member of the cast. The climate has changed. So I have a question. Was this an issue of maybe management at YNR prior to 2009?
No, I don't think so. Do you know what I think it was? I think it was an issue of the high life, the heyday of soap operas. Allowed ego to soar with the ratings, the salaries, and the accolades. And I think a lot of people, it's sort of like believing your own press. Chris. It's sort of like when people tell you you're really so wonderful, every single day you hear it, you start to believe it.
Right.
And honestly, I think that daytime was in its prime in the late, the 80s, especially into the 90s, that whole period. And coming back, not under contract, and not as an integral part of the cast, but as a very sideline story or support character. Whenever they recast another family member, I would be called back for 4 or 5 episodes so that they could see all the familiar faces around the new people. But it was never a storyline involving Tracy as the key. And so it was a situation where the other, especially when new people are starting and I'm not in the building, and there's new actors that they get really busy and a lot of attention and a lot of press and a lot of magazine articles and photos taken and fuss. Then other people come in, and if other people come in that have been there before they were born,
right,
or just beyond their awareness, it takes a while. I don't look like a soap star.
Right.
And they think I'm, a secretary, or I'm delivering scripts, or I'm a producer, and that's fine. That's fine. But if your ego is not out of control, then you're just as nice to everyone as you are to your boss.
Yes.
But not everybody is like that. And I think there's a certain, in the celebrity world, there's a certain temptation that just being human, you fall for in your early career, and that all of a sudden you're a big deal and that you deserve more than someone else, or And so that was a prevailing attitude that I often faced.
Ah, interesting.
Because I wasn't, it took weeks sometimes for people to figure out I was actually an actress on the show.
Wow.
Yeah,
Wow.
and think about it. I really have always been this very niche character, and
Yes.
there aren't a lot of my kind of character, even on other soaps. There were occasionally people that were not a typical soap, beautiful, glamorous actor playing a beautiful, glamorous role.
Yes.
So I think that was part of it, and I think what happened is soap operas started experiencing their decline.
Yes.
And the world of soap shows started to get canceled. And it wasn't because they were developing a new show that was going to be on in its place. It was because they were filling the programming space with cheaper, easier, non-scripted. All of a sudden, there were 15 soaps on the air, and now there are 4.
I know.
And
it's crazy.
And people started having to take pay cuts to stay under contract, and people started getting asked to do less and take less. And it became, if you don't, our show is threatened. Do you want a job? Do you want our show on the air, or do you want to stand your ground? And it took several years for that shakeup to happen.
Yes.
For people to realize, hey man, if I want my show to still be on TV, if I still want to play this character for years more, everybody has to sort of chip in. There were budget cuts all across the board. Things couldn't have your $1,000 shoes.
Yeah.
And that really assaults people's normalcy, people's ego, the rhythm of how everything always was. What people were used to was no longer recognizable. There was such a terror, if you will, that all of a sudden every soap was going to be replaced by reality TV or game shows or talk shows, things that were cheaper and not so expensive to support. And everybody thought it was going to go on forever. And that's the one good thing about being on and off a show. You know that it doesn't ever last forever.
That's right.
All shows get canceled. All characters get killed.
That's right, eventually.
And so I think that it leveled the playing field.
Yes.
All of a sudden, anybody that was there working was important. Anybody that was in for a storyline, it just meant that there was more to do, that there was that the show was hanging on. And so I think the change of the face of daytime, the elimination of so many other shows, really juggled everybody's egos and wits and shook people up enough to be, I think in a way, that part of it was good. It made people remember they had to tighten their belts a little bit. They had to work a little harder. They couldn't be complacent about their work. They had to come in with their lines learned. They couldn't spend 5 takes, figuring out how they were going to play it. They had to come in with a plan. And I think that changed a whole lot about everybody's effort. It's exhausting work.
I bet.
My husband is the sound mixer at General Hospital. And maybe the actors only have a hard day every now and then. I'm not saying it's exhausting so much for actors as it is for the team. The people on their feet all day behind a camera or sitting up on a boom, wheeling that thing out and in and trying to concentrate without enough rehearsal, without enough preparation. It's like combat duty.
Yes.
And it's hard. And so I think everybody understands now clearly that we can't fill a take because we're lazy or tired. Everybody has to give their best all the time, and it's really changed things.
That's very candid and very interesting. Soaps are an ensemble effort for sure, and it sounds to me like everyone's starting to realize that more and more now with this reality check.
Yes. And that's what changed for everyone. I mean, there's not room for that kind of ego when the job just has to be done for us all to survive.
Well, you had mentioned the exhausting work, the many hours that go into doing a soap. We recently had Jamie Lynn Bower on the show, who left right around the time you came on. Did you ever work with Jamie Lynn?
I was never in scenes with her, but I may have been maybe at the Kay Chancellor the first time Marge died and Kay didn't. And she had lost her memory, and everyone thought Chancellor died, and they had a big, giant, historic funeral with all these cast members from the past.
Right.
I may have sat in the same church pews with her.
Juliana McCarthy.
Dialogue.
Yeah.
But she was still on the show for maybe 6 months. When it was first starting, she was still there for a few months before she was phased out.
A few months. 1982 was such a big year for the show because it was the end of sort of the original 2 families. For the most part, Jill was still there, but then it became the Abbotts and the Newmans. But she said that when the show was bumped up to an hour around 1980, they had her working like 6 days a week, sometimes 7, and these long hours, and she was so exhausted, and she asked to be let out because of that. How has that reality changed now that the budgets have tightened? Was there a period in the 80s perhaps where everyone sort of got used to the new schedule of doing an hour show and it was more of a 5-day-a-week thing? Has it gotten more grueling since in the last several years because of the cutbacks?
Well, Chris, I can only speak from my experience, and it's not been constant. I haven't been there all the time.
Yeah.
And I think that someone that has been under contract all these years would have maybe a more personal way to describe it to you. But in the 80s when I started, and it was 1982, so it was right when Jamie was phasing out, and it had been an hour for 2 years. And that's part of what I think the Abbotts were brought in to do, is sort of flesh out, so that people weren't worked so hard. They were spreading out story. They were kind of expanding the number of cast members. And we were only working 5 days a week, always, in the 80s. And sometimes, like if there was a masquerade ball or, some big giant benefit or a concert, sometimes they would go late. Sometimes it would be late nights into midnight and sometimes early in the morning for a couple of days. But it never lasted for too long. There were very rare hiatus times, except holidays, because, soaps air every day. You've got to keep up. There was just a lot more time given to polish things individually. When young actors were brought in those days, they would give them, 5, 6, 7, 8 takes. The producers would come out and discuss the character and help with character development for young actors that maybe didn't quite know how to do it on their own. And so more time was given for things like that. As the show has changed, the current schedule is like this. They're always dark on Mondays. We shoot 4 days a week, Tuesday through Friday.
Okay.
And we shoot 5+ shows in those 4 days.
Oh, wow.
There are also hiatus times taken. Now, for example, they might, at Thanksgiving, instead of just taking the Thursday and Friday off, they might have the whole week of Thanksgiving off. And it means we have to bank those shows. It means that we have to do that 5 and a little extra every 4-day week. We bank up the extra day that we don't shoot on Mondays, plus for whatever hiatus time is taken. And honestly, it's rare that we go past the close of our 10 or 12-hour day.
Wow.
We're not there till midnight. If they are, it's for something huge and shocking, and it's what we've just started the new budget.
Yeah.
Because normally those days go from, our calls are usually 7 o'clock in the morning for hair and makeup, and they start shooting at 8:30, and then they take an hour lunch sometime in the early afternoon when it flows with the schedule, like 1 to 2, let's say, and then everybody's up by 6 or 7, sometimes earlier. We don't do 5 takes of something. We do 1 take.
That's it.
And you have to fall down before they'll stop and do it over again. or you have to, tip over the wine into someone's lap, and you have to stop.
Set the room on fire.
That's right. Rarely they will interrupt a scene if there's a big move where people are coming down a staircase and the cameras have to sweep by, and they may do that 2 or 3 times, but they don't do the whole scene over again. They just do that part until they've got it, and then they continue into the scene. They've become very conservative and very effectual in knowing right at the moment it's not working, to stop and fix it right then and then keep going, and they'll never go back to it.
Economic.
Yeah, and so that's what's really changed. And it's not the kind of demands that you don't have to cry 5 times over and over. That's what used to challenge me in the 80s. By the 3rd time, I couldn't cry again. I was just worn out.
Yeah.
And so that's what's hard. But if I know I only get 1 chance to do it, I do it. And you deliver. And you train your tool, your muscle, your method. You train your instrument to perform on demand. And it actually, in my opinion, is much easier to do it this way.
Very interesting. So now it's 4 days, but more material in those 4 days. And 1 take, boom, boom, boom. So you've got to be on your game, clearly.
That's right.
And that's interesting that you mentioned that the Abbotts were brought in to flesh out the show and bring more characters in. I think what Jamie Lynn was talking about is how, especially maybe in 1980-81, she was just in every episode. episode as
Right.
Lori Brooks. And so I think it was just a gradual exhaustion. And then in 82, I wonder if she had hung in there for another year or two, how that would have all worked out to keep that Brooks element there, like with Jill Foster. And I have a couple more questions about YNR for you in a bit, but your drama queen bee identity, which I love, you come off as anything but the typical TV drama queen. What's the genesis of that, your sort of crafty identity for your quilting and creative living brand that you're establishing online? And
Well, I'll tell you, it comes from my email address.
Uh-huh.
A long time ago, I thought it was really entertaining that Drama Queen B for Beth and I used it as my email address, and I kept saying it's my personality, not because I'm on a soap opera. And it wasn't. It was the opposite. It was because I was on the soap opera. But I'm really not a drama queen. Although I have my moments, I'm sure. I'm really not.
We all do.
I'm pretty earthy. Yeah. But I thought it was really funny. And then when I decided that I wanted to, during a period that I was off the show for a longer time, I have other jobs that I do and other things I do to make money. You know, you're raising a family, and I have horses and things to support, so I can't just put my feet up.
Yes.
So I was sort of finding my way through my life, but it always returns. I've been sewing since I was a pre-teenager, and often it was custom design. I was in a lot of theater companies in my early years and went back to some theater eventually, and I made a lot of my own costumes. One hilarious summer, somebody donated a bunch of drapes to the theater program, and I had to make them into pilgrim costumes. And young, and I didn't know to say no, it can't be done. I didn't know to say this isn't really going to work for it. I just did it, and so it's sort of been in some cases relaxing for me to unwind. In other cases, it was very practical and pragmatic. I was a starving actor and didn't have enough money to buy presents for everyone, but I could make things and make things inexpensively. And so I started making handmade gifts. So it sort of all continued to be it was always my hobby. My hobby first go-to relaxation hobby thing was to sew or create or craft or make jewelry or make handbags or whatever. And a lot of my celebrity friends started buying my things because it looked good on me, and oh my gosh, where'd you get that? I made it. You're kidding, can you make it? So I started actually selling stuff sort of sideways or laterally to a lot of my friends, and they ended up on television. They ended up people wearing them to personal appearances and having the photographs. And so I, for a while, made sort of a secondary income making specialty bags and jewelry and things for celebrity clients. But I found that I don't have enough hours in the day for my one-of-a-kind things to be priced to make any sense for everyone to enjoy them. I just don't have enough hours, and I don't want a sweatshop, and I don't want a bunch of people recreating my stuff.
Yes.
So the best alternative is to teach people how to do it. And so I started teaching.
Well, you're an acting teacher. You're a teacher at heart. So that seems natural.
I love communicating and sharing stuff with people. I probably talk too much, in fact. And there's probably a fine line where we cross over.
No. This is great. This is great.
So I started teaching it, and then people started asking me, could you write those instructions out? Can you bring those to class? Can you draw out the pattern? And so I started thinking, well, maybe I should make a brand. Maybe I should. And the YouTube channel you mentioned and my blog is sort of, they're all kind of new in the mix, but they're, again, to sort of outreach what I ultimately hope to have as my secondary life, which I can do from anywhere, Central Coast or wherever I end up. I can continue to write instructional books. I can continue to write patterns, draw out patterns, and do these little instructional videos. I mean, I'm in show business. I know how to. I know how to talk camera, and my husband has all this fabulous equipment, and I have little friends that are good crew people that can help me put this all together. And I edit, and I have a friend who's a best-selling author, and she has hired me from time to time when she needed the extra help to edit and format her book before they go to the publisher. So I kind of had an idea of how that works. So it all kind of landed in my lap, and people kept asking. I do some public speaking also on women's issues, and when at my last booking, the lady said, "Now, if you have books or whatever, will you bring them and sell them? I know people would love to have you autograph." And I didn't have anything, and I thought, this is silly. Everyone's asking, and I know how to. I might as well just do it.
Got to do a book.
That's right. And I will probably have copies of my first quilting book in 2 weeks. And the eBook will probably be launched by the end of this week. So on my Twitter and Facebook page and all that, there will be a little announcement in the early phase of writing this, I was dealing with big-time publishers. I have a literary agent, and all that was, and everybody wanted me to change stuff. They all had comments. They all wanted me to, okay, leave that chapter out. Could you put in a chapter about this? And these are people who've never picked up a needle and thread.
Right.
So I did all those things. I tried really hard to jump through all the hoops and make them happy and make their chapter, here's your wedding memory quilt thing, whatever. I tried really hard to satisfy those people. And in doing that, I lost what I wanted to communicate with my book.
Yes.
Every chapter begins with something personal about me. I've got probably 500 tutorial crafting books. I love them. I buy everybody's because I want to support designers and talented craftspeople, so I buy everything. So in looking back, the one thing most people don't ever cover, it's all instructions. They never talk about themselves. And the one thing I have as a celebrity, sort of, is that people might be interested in what made me be attracted to roses and why I learned to make three-dimensional velvet roses.
Yes.
Marie wanted to know. So the beginning of every chapter is a whole section about my aunt who gave me, when she passed away, loved roses. She gave me money to build a beautiful memory rose garden for her, which I did, and I stacked that with my summer fitness program. I stacked 600 self-paving stones in my new rose garden for my auntie. And I thought, and that's how I sort of really started paying attention to roses, and then I learned how to make them out of velvet, so I'm teaching you.
Great.
And there are pictures that are kind of candid pictures throughout my sewing journey that people might find entertaining. So
it's personal, Yeah.
Yeah. So I took it back from the publishers and said, never mind. I'm just going to self-publish.
Do my thing.
My way. Yeah, and just see what happens. And so that's where we are now. Yeah, I took out the weird wedding memory quote chapter, and I'm now adding back what I want to make and what I want to teach people to make. And so we're just finishing up the last of the art this week. And like I said, that will be made into an ebook by probably this weekend coming. And then it will be sent off to the press. And I'll have probably hard copies by certainly the end of August. So I'm looking forward to sort of rolling that out. And like I said, I'm just going to do it personally for now and see where it goes. I have a lot of support in the sewing industry press. I don't know why you would know this, Chris, but home sewing is like a multi-billion-dollar industry right now.
Wow.
It is not just quilting, but machine embroidery, which I've been doing for 15 or 20 years now. With the very first home machine, I bought the very first one. I'm on my sixth machine that's now a semi-industrial model. So I love the technology there, too. I can design on my computer while I'm at work and come home and have something sew out that I designed and punched every stitch. So technology has really informed this very creative, very elemental, a needle and thread. Your hand goes in, your needle comes up, your hand goes in, your needle comes up. Now you can design all that stuff on a computer and make it happen. And so that's what I'm wanting to also be a part of and share.
Well, I love it, and it's your vision, and it's your voice, and in this new media age, it makes perfect sense to have that control, to put the product out yourself with your YouTube, your Twitter, your Facebook, and we'll link all those in our story about your podcast, by the way.
Thank you.
You bet. What's the book called, and are you selling it also at bethmaitland.com, on your Etsy site? Where can we find it?
Yes. I think I'm going to announce it everywhere and sell it on Etsy for now. It will shortly thereafter be available on places like Amazon and barnesandnoble.com too. There are little ways that you can partner with them to sell modest run products. And so it will be available eventually like at Amazon and Barnes & Noble. Right now it will start at my Etsy store. And as I get confident and figure out the way, it will end up over there probably by, I'm thinking maybe September, October. It will be in more retail sites. But I'm doing a series of them. This is book one. I'm calling it Beth's Enchanted Needle Series.
Nice.
We're big fairy fans. This is going to, don't let it freak you out, Chris. It's just a weird little my daughter has always loved fairies since she was little, and she even had a fairy in her playhouse. And so all of her growing up, she kept asking me, do you think that it's possible to grow up and be a fairy? And I told her, I'm sure of it. So it's called Beth's Enchanted Needle Series, and this is Bewitching Fresh Stitching. It's the first issue. Then there's going to be a tea time one. That's the second book that I'm starting. That'll be Magical Time for Tea or something like that. But there'll be something fairy-ish involved in each book. And so
I love it.
So this one is Bewitching Fresh Stitching, Enchanted Needle Series, book one.
I love it. It
Yeah.
all ties in. I love it on your Twitter page how you say that you like all things sparkly,
Yes.
including your Emmy, I'm sure.
Well, actually, this is the first time in the last 2 years that it's been out somewhere prominent.
Yeah,
Because
yeah.
my husband won one also, finally. He's a sound mixer. He did,
Yeah.
when all my children moved to the West Coast, he was their sound mixer until they were canceled. And
Oh.
once that announcement was made, ABC asked him if he would move over to General Hospital. So he was nominated this year for General Hospital. He did not win, but he did win
Congratulations.
for his mixing of All My Children. And prior to that, he had 3 or 4 regional Emmys for the Rose Parade, which he did
Terrific.
every year for many years. But they're littler. The regional Emmys are smaller. They're only about maybe 10 inches tall, and so I call them the action figures.
Fun
And
size Emmys.
I would try to stack them on stacks of books next to mine, so that they were as tall as mine.
My Emmy
now
is
that he
bigger
has-
than your Emmy.
Now that he has a real big one, a real size one, his
Life
he
size.
now is totally tipped the scales in his favor. He's got the big giant Emmy and all of his little regional Emmys around it. So now we actually have them up on the fireplace because it's more of a sort of joke, a family entertainment than it is for bragging rights. But
I love it. So put on your sunglasses if you come into Beth's living room because it's very
That's
shiny
right.
hearth.
And in addition to that, my daughter, whose name is Emilia, Emilia, we've always called her Emmy. So when she was born, one of the wardrobe designer at Young and Restless said, "Oh, look, you have your second Emmy."
I have to. That's right. I love it. And your daughter is getting into performing arts?
Yes, she's a fabulous musician, and she's about
Great.
to start college in the music department on bassoon. But when she's in the marching band, she plays the flute. She plays a little cello, a little piano, a little guitar. She plays piccolo and alto flute. She's very, very facile and very fearless. She'll pick up anything and make it sound good. But her main instrument will be bassoon. She hopes to perform in orchestras around Europe for the early part of her career, and then she would like to teach.
Wow. So she's
Yeah.
following in your footsteps in creative ways. You, of course, sang on YNR. Didn't you sing the lullaby for Colleen's funeral?
Yes, I did, and it was one of the most sweet and beautiful gestures. David Kurtz and Jack Alacco were at that time our composers. Jack Alacco wrote that lullaby he called Angel's Lullaby. And he called me and he said, there's no budget for it anymore. We can't take it to Capitol Records like we used to. But he said, if you want to drive over to my house, I would love for you to record this.
Wow.
So he sent me a copy and I learned it and I went over for a Sunday afternoon and we recorded it in his home studio. And that recording not only was under Colleen's funeral during the show and for the beautiful montage at the end of her funeral, but it also, that recording won an Emmy that year for Best Original Song.
I did not know that. That is amazing. Stay tuned. In one moment, we will share with you Beth's beautiful rendition of Tracy's song to Colleen, An Angel's Lullaby. Also, check back with us in late August for the conclusion of Beth's exclusive interview. She shares secrets from the YNR set. She breaks her silence for the first time about Brenda Dixon's controversial new book, You've Got to Hear It. And she shares some loving, never-before-heard memories of the late, great Jeannie Cooper. And now, on to An Angel's Lullaby.
In my heart, may angel wings enfold you, their voices fill the sky, all the joy of heaven's song, an angel's lullaby. So sleep, my child, and have no fear, for this is not goodbye. Listen close, and you will hear an angel's lullaby.
Just as Beth Maitland reimagined and reinvented her life in her 40s and beyond, so too has the host of our Reawakenings Dream Interpretation segment, Yvonne Reba. Check out her website at yvonneryba.com, YVONNERYBA.com. This week, Yvonne takes us to a period in her life around 1991 as she approached age 50, where she had many, many struggles, many challenges, many things coming into her life as influences. And she looks back at a dream she had over 20 years ago, and in retrospect realizes that her dream was telling her to trust her intuition and trust her own mind. It's a very interesting nocturnal story that we have to share this time. So let's check in once again with Yvonne. Hi there again, Yvonne. How are you?
Hello, Chris. Well, I'm doing very well, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, it's great to catch up with you again. Can't believe we're already in early August.
I know, this is scary.
Scary, scary, scary. Time flies.
Yes, it does. We're thinking of Christmas next. Wow, it's going to be scary.
It'll be here before you know it. Well, I have to share that I just interviewed another Young and the Restless classic actress, Beth Maitland.
Oh, yeah.
Who has been on the show off and on for over 30 years. And she's really a cool lady. In recent years, she has reinvented herself in numerous creative, crafty ways, really following her heart's desire, especially I think at age 50 and beyond. And so that made me think, does Yvonne have anything from the Dream Vaults that sort of connects?
Oh, yes, the Dream Vaults, yes.
The Dream Vaults. Let's open that up.
I have something, Chris, definitely, but I've got to tell you that I did have a look at Beth Maitland's website.
Yeah.
And she is a wonderful woman. I mean, she has great pictures of her horses.
Yeah.
She's into the textile design and all sorts of other things,
Yeah.
as well as her acting career. So she has definitely made the most of her life.
Hasn't she?
Yes, she has, and that's what it's about. It's about all of the different potentials that we have for different things, and she has got into it. She's creative in many ways, so...
Multifaceted, and she never sort of fit the mold of the traditional glamorous soap star, which always made her so relatable.
Yes.
That part of her came through in the character, and so she always has sort of just done her thing and sort of followed her spiritual path, and the right things have happened for her. It's a nice example of someone who's living well, I would say.
That's right. That's what counts.
Yeah.
It's more important in the long run when you look back and you feel satisfied with what you've done. And I know she did extremely well. I think you had mentioned once that she won an Emmy.
Yes, yeah.
For her Young and the Restless work years ago.
First Emmy on the show for an actor, yeah.
Yeah. She has done very well. I picked a dream from a time in my life when it was very difficult. There was 1 year, and it was 91 to 92. It sort of started around the end of August 91, and it went on till about July 92. And I can safely say it was probably the most horrible year of my life.
Oh, gosh.
So, I know. We don't want to know about them, but everything teaches you something, and I certainly learned a lot from this year. But before this year actually started, and I was looking through my book, one of many, The Vaults, and I found this particular dream about a skull. And it's such a weird dream. I thought, I've got to do this one. This is so really odd. But at the same time, looking back on it, it was amazing how, if you could get the message right, this would have helped tremendously. All right, now we're talking about 91, okay? And I was 50 in the November of that year. So I wasn't quite 50 at this point, but I was getting there.
Big transitional time in everyone's life when they hit 40, 50, and beyond. So it was all the universe, a lot of things were intersecting in your life at that point.
That's right. We were living in California, and we were... At that time, you're probably too young to remember a lot of this stuff, but California went through a lot of ups and downs. When the stock market, plummeted, everybody stopped
spending money, especially in the field of work in which my late husband was dealing with, and that was for the rich and famous and so on. And immediately that they all, saw things shutting down, they stopped any kind of construction, decorating, whatever was going on. And he dealt in things like 30,000 square foot houses and stuff,
Because he was an artist?
Yeah, he was an artist, yeah.
Yeah.
So we were contemplating, things had slowed down a lot, but they weren't terrible, but they had slowed down, and we were thinking we should move back to Texas. And then we had family and friends who were saying, oh, yes, come back. It's wonderful. You will have no problem. There's plenty of work. It's really cheap to live here, blah, blah, blah. Okay, so this is the setup for the dream, all right? So I dreamt that I was in a kind of a laboratory or a kind of medical room. It wasn't an operating room, but it had a lot of medical stuff in it. And I was sitting in a circle, in the middle of a circle of doctors. This team of doctors were around me. And here was I, sitting listening to them, when one of them announced that they had given me a skull transplant. So, yeah, no, can you imagine
Wow.
it? So
By the way, Yvonne, we just gave you a skull. How you doing?
Yeah. And then they gave me my old skull, all right? And I looked at it.
That's interesting.
I know. I looked at it, and it had got a stamp on it just behind where the ear would be. It was some kind of a trademark or something. Somebody had stamped it.
Freaky.
And are you sure thing? And I said, look, I wasn't very happy about this, I got to tell you. I said, there's always somebody takes advantage of you the minute you take your eyes off them, all right?
Right. the minute that anesthesia hits, watch out.
Yeah, and I was thinking about various people that I knew, and some of these people later on after the dream, I recognized them as being friends in Texas. This new transplant, apparently, that I had was made out of, it was man-made, and it was made out of some lightweight alloy, okay? And I was thinking, what makes them think that's a better deal than a skull made out of bone? Lightweight alloy didn't sound like a good idea to me.
Right.
Right? So then, to their amazement, to the doctor's amazement, there and then, I grew another skull.
Wow.
Yes, I did. And my body rejected the man-made one. It just threw it out. And I got a new skull grew, and that was it.
You're like a cyborg now.
Yes. I know, this sounds like a really weird dream, but it was pretty good. In dreams, you can have anything going. It doesn't matter. There's no logic. It's all symbol. Symbolism to the nth degree, all right? And you have to figure out what these symbols are about.
Right.
So, of course, when I came to, it was like, what the heck was that about? Okay, well, some of it's pretty obvious, okay? We do not want the man-made, lightweight alloy skull. And a skull, of course, is the receptacle for our brain, our mind. Although I think the mind is more than just what's inside your brain. I think it's probably the whole of us is part of our mind. But the skull is spiritual, our deep ideas and thoughts, and all our creative abilities. I mean, when you think about it in history, they're considered to be emblems and symbols of great power. Remember the crystal skull that was found in, I can't remember now.
Indiana Jones. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. There was a real crystal skull. I mean, they took that idea and made it into Indiana Jones's thing. So there really is one. Skulls kept by the Mayans of their enemies and so on, these were symbols of power. All right, because it's recognized that the brain was like the most powerful thing that governed our whole being. So in the dream, the skull is the spiritual ideas, the deep thoughts and so on that I was having. And we were coming up, like I said, to a difficult time when we were contemplating moving from California back to Texas. So my subconscious was saying, now, do not allow other people to influence you in what you're doing in your life. If you don't want to do it, you should pay attention to that feeling. And I didn't want to move back to Texas. It's not that I didn't love Texas. I do love Texas. I live there now. But at that point in 91, we were in a slump, but it wasn't terrible. And I felt like things were going to get better. And I didn't have a good feeling about Texas and coming back at that point in time. And I was right. Like I said, we had the worst year when we came back that we ever had. And it was just so bad that it got to we were selling our belongings, everything. I mean, just the worst that you can think of.
Oh, wow.
And no money. The car kept breaking down. We had two cars. We had to sell one so we could fix the other. I'm not getting into the whole thing because it was just so awful.
Oh.
It was not good. And this dream was saying, now, this thing that's on your skull, your old skull, this stamp here, somebody stamped these ideas on your mind and you're going along with it. And in its place, they're putting these lightweight, not very dependable or stable, or it's not certainly going to do as good a job as your skull did, things that they came up with. And they're authority figures. Doctors are authority figures. I mean, we go to them to be fixed, to be healed. They give us advice and tell us what to do. But and from my father, had found out that, you have to be your own judge about things. And because somebody tells you something from a point of authority doesn't necessarily mean it's the best thing for you.
Listen to your intuition, right?
Absolutely, and especially in religious and spiritual matters, you are your own best guide because you, inside of you, have your own inner being, as it were, your higher self, telling you what to do. So my higher being was saying, do not take in other people's ideas. It's going to be a mistake. You're going to, instead of having your own thing, you're going to be taking their idea on and look at it. It's a lightweight alloy that's not going to do a very good job.
It would be artificial for you,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's perfect.
It's interesting because the idea of an open mind doesn't mean that you let everything in. It's semi-permeable, so to speak. You let some things in, but you got to have that barrier there of your own inner being saying, this isn't right for me. And that's kind of what you, in retrospect, think that dream may have been telling you?
Well, yes, and at the end, when I grew my own skull and threw out this piffling alloy thing, looking back on it, at that time, since it was my husband's business, and I helped him, but it was his work more than anything. He was the one who made the decisions about where he was going to be, and I didn't want us to move, but I didn't put up too big of a fight.
Yeah.
Because I said, well, he's the one who's doing it, not me.
Right.
However, when it came to losing everything and being in this terrible situation, it was me saying, we're going to move, right? We have enough to get to the next place, and that's it. But we're going to take that risk because I know we're in the wrong place and we have to move. And we did. And within less than a week, he had a phone call saying, you've got to come and help with this big job. I can't do it without you. And if you don't come, the whole thing falls through, and so on and so on. They were like, the universe said, here you go. Here's what you need.
Right.
And off he went. And I followed him about a week or so later, bringing the car over with the cat that we had and whatever I could put in the car, and back to California, yes.
It's like the reverse grapes of wrath, in a way.
That's very good.
Because in 95, I got in an old car and made the trip from Oklahoma to California. And, the 90s were definitely, in those early 90s, were a decade of struggle for me and my family, too, as I was hitting 20. So it seems like when you approach 20, 30, 40, 50, and so on, you have these tests, you have these challenges, and sometimes you have these offers or these influences that you have to consider, but more than anything, maybe you really have to listen to that inner voice.
You do. And when I said we are moving, because if we stay here, we're going to die, which is how I felt. Everything, I could write a whole book about how awful that year was, but why would I?
Right,
I want
right.
to put that behind me. Then moving on, everything started to open up. And from having nothing, over the next few years, we amassed a whole lot of stuff again, So I'm telling anybody out there, even if you have to, if you get rid of your stuff, if you have to, do not worry, because you can collect it all again.
That's right.
Because I found out when I moved the next time, I still had as much stuff as I'd had at the beginning.
eBay.
I sold it all. Yes. We didn't have eBay then, but we did. I didn't know about it.
Right.
Yes, but I kept the faith. I knew that it would be okay eventually. It's just like going through the operation, and then you have the recovery, and then you have the rehabilitation and the exercise and all that pain that goes with it. And then you're okay again. And that's how that year was. It was a big lesson in first trusting your inner being, your intuition.
Yes.
And taking notice of it. And also doing the best that you can with what you've got. Because we did get through a horrendous time.
Yeah.
And when I look back on it, I think it's amazing how we actually managed to do all this stuff, considering we had very little to do it with.
You survived.
We did. We survived. Yes.
And now you know if you ever have a dream again about somebody putting a different skull on you or stamping your, that has some serious repercussions.
Yes, I may take a notice. Somebody had actually been around there and stuck their trademark on my skull without me knowing about it. Yeah, I'm glad I grew a new one. That's good.
Well, there you go. It's people wanting to put their brand, their structure, their thoughts, and it's not a one-size-fits-all thing. And you live and learn, but I love that you can go back through your dream journals and look at something from then with the wisdom that you have now, and you can see maybe what it was telling you, and then you can be more aware if you have anything like that the next time around.
Oh, yes. I've learned a lot since then, believe me.
Yeah.
I have paid more attention and become a little bit more stubborn, perhaps, about following my footsteps and not somebody else's. I've got to make my own way.
Yes.
It doesn't mean you can't do things with other people. I believe in teamwork.
Yes.
I'm on various boards here in the little town I live in, the charity stuff we do and volunteer work. And I love working with people, but we have to do our own thing.
We do.
And as soon as somebody is trying to make you do something you don't want to do, that you feel isn't right in some way, you have to look at it carefully.
And if someone accuses you of being hard-headed, it's happened to me before, you stop and you look at it and you go, well, okay, let me look at this as objectively as I can. But in the end, if you're going to have a hard covering around your head, it needs to be your own skull and not some fake one.
Not somebody else's. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, funny.
Well, Yvonne, this is always illuminating, and it's fun that this is our first official reawakening segment. I've called reawakenings, but now we're sort of officially, and it's perfect. So,
thank you. That's wonderful.
Well, you always reawaken us with your wisdom.
I hope so.
You did.
Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you very much. That was really good.
Well, we appreciate it, and we look forward to more in the coming weeks.
Thank you, dear. Bye-bye.
Reimagine That with Chris Mann was brought to you by Retroality TV, copyright 2013 by Chris Mann. You can find us at retroality.tv and at reimaginethat.libsyn.com. Tweet us at retroalitytv or join us on Facebook at facebook.com/retroalitytv. And don't forget to check out our TV channel at youtube.com/retroalitytv. In closing, let's reflect on the fact that while our lives are sometimes reminiscent of the most complicated of soap operas, we should always strive to enjoy each scene and make the most of every moment, because too often in life, there are no second takes.